Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, and we're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Arsen Ostrovsky. He's the CEO of the International Legal Forum. Arsen, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks, Josh.
Tell our viewers a little bit about what is the International Legal Forum.
The International Legal Forum is an Israel-based NGO that is a global network of some 4,000 lawyers and activists around the world that are committed to standing up for Israel and combating anti-Semitism, delegitimization, terror, and BDS in the international legal arena. Recently, we've been fighting the apartheid lie, we've been standing up for Israel at the UN, and we've been taking on the BDS movement. Really, we're trying to use the law to stand up for Israel and the Jewish people.
Well, you have no shortage of cases. Anti-Semitism has exploded around the world. What are some of the big egregious issues that you've seen in the last few weeks and months?
So you're right. We live in a time and an age where anti-Semitism is rising. This is barely 75 years after the Holocaust, and anti-Semitism across many parts of the world, not just Europe, but in the United States, is at record levels, and that is very, very disturbing. And it comes from all different sides. It comes from the far left, it comes from the far right, and it also comes from the Islamist circles as well. And what we've seen is, on the one hand, not only a resurgence of hardcore anti-Semitism directed against Jews as individuals, as most recently we saw in the Kanye West example, where he said phrases like he's going to call DEFCON 3 against Jews, blaming Jews for all sorts of grievances, really using some very age-old anti-Semitic tropes. But we're also seeing a new kind of anti-Semitism, which is really anti-Zionism disguised as anti-Semitism, where we're seeing, instead of the Jew as the individual being targeted, we're seeing Israel as the collective Jew amongst the nations being targeted. And that, I think, is the far more disconcerting threat that we have to deal with today, because it's far more difficult to pinpoint.
You mentioned Kanye West, and one of the things that's crazy about that whole scenario is that he felt comfortable saying these things. It wasn't even masking it as anti-Zionism or what most traditional anti-Semites do. He's basically saying Jews are controlling the media, they're controlling the message that gets out, they're controlling him, his doctor's trying to kill him. How does someone who's in the public eye feel comfortable saying these things publicly?
It's a good question. I think what we've really seen is this mainstreaming of anti-Semitism, where there was a time when you couldn't say these kinds of things. You would say, I don't have anything against the Jews, it's Israel. Whereas now there's a sense of comfort in mainstreaming where not just celebrities, but other people of influence on campuses feel at ease in saying, attacking not only Israel, but in making these gross anti-Semitic tropes and accusations against Jews as individuals because of our race, because of our faith. And what was interesting, I think, when the Kanye example is that he was universally condemned for the anti-Semitic statements that he made, including by celebrities, people in Hollywood, politicians, and many others. But the interesting thing is, had he said, instead of Jews, had he referred to Zionists or Israelis, there would have been a different case. And this is something we see day in, day out, and we're fighting to change, is that when people like Kanye or those who seek to engage in anti-Semitism replace the word Jew for Zionist, there is this almost kind of justification or kind of minimizing of the anti-Semitism when it's the exact same Jew hatred. There are no ifs, buts, maybes. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and we have to call both of them out just as vigorously.
Well, I also think there's a bigger problem here, because there was huge condemnation of Kanye. He was kicked out of Adidas. They wouldn't even let him go to Skechers. His music is now banned from Apple Music. But when someone like Ilhan Omar, who's a congresswoman, says, follow the Benjamins and the Jews are controlling things, she has a seat on the Foreign Relations Committee. So why is there a double standard between Kanye and someone like Ilhan Omar?
Absolutely, there is a double standard because when you say something against Jews as individuals, that's universally recognized as an act of anti-Semitism. But when you use Israel as a scapegoat, then that somehow is more acceptable, and it's not. Anti-Semitism is anti-Semitism is anti-Semitism in whichever manifestation, whether it's denial of Jews our equal rights to self-determination, which is Zionism at its core, whether it's attacking Jews as individuals because of our faith in themselves. And just as we condemn Kanye West with full veracity, we have to do exactly the same with the likes of Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and lawmakers who use Israel as an excuse or as a scapegoat to cover their own anti-Semitism and Jew hatred.
We're seeing anti-Semitism become institutionalized. We just saw in the case of Berkeley, they have Jew-free zones or anti-Zionist-free zones, or basically anti-Semitic areas where Jews can't go. How is this even legal in America?
In America, you have the First Amendment right to free speech, where a lot of things are able to get through the threshold because of the sacrosanct right enshrined under the Constitution for free speech, including hate speech. The interesting thing in the case of Berkeley, this bastion of progressive society, where groups like the SJP, the Students for Justice in Palestine, a vehemently anti-Semitic, anti-Israel extremist group was born, where the BDS movement thrives. In this particular case that you refer to, what they're trying to say is that even though the reference here is, no Zionists welcome, what they're trying to portray this as incorrectly so and maliciously so is as not a case of anti-Semitism, but rather a issue of First Amendment free speech. Whereas I think the correct interpretation is this is not something about free speech, but it's something about anti-Semitism, because when you reject Zionism, when you deny the Jewish people their right to self-determination that is applied to every other nation and group of people, that is anti-Semitism, full stop. So they have framed this as an argument about free speech, as the fact that as if Zionism is only about a political discourse, whereas Zionism is something that is inherently and intrinsically and indispensably part of our identity as Jews as well. So when you say no Zionists allowed, you may as well be saying no Jews allowed.
We're seeing this also all over the world. It's not just America. In Europe, the rise of anti-Semitism is shocking. It used to be, like you said, death to Zionism. Now they're saying death to the Jews again. Why are we seeing this happen all over the world again? Why is history repeating itself?
It's a good question. If, as the saying goes, if we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it. And we are repeating it. Mind you, the only difference today from 75 plus years ago is the fact that we have a strong and vibrant Jewish state with a sovereign army to defend and protect us. That is the main difference. I think that, it's... there are many reasons for this, but I think one of the main ones is perhaps a lack of political willpower. In Europe, for example, especially, it's one thing to say, yes, we support Israel, yes, we support the Jewish people, but when you continue, for example, to write out blank checks to the Palestinian Authority, one of the most, permanent, or one of the most significant purveyors of anti-Semitism, of Jew hatred, of incitement and libel, that is anti-Semitism. That blood is on their hands as well. So you can't say, I'm against anti-Semitism, but at the same time be funding anti-Semites like the Palestinian Authority, which continue to, for example, write out pay-to-slay checks to murderers of Jews and Israelis.
You mentioned one big difference that we have the State of Israel, but another big difference is that we're not alone. We have our Christian allies around the world. How big do Christians who stand with Israel, how big a role do they play in the fight against anti-Semitism?
Incredible role. I think the Christian Zionist Pro-Israel community is one of our biggest, one of our strongest allies, and they play really an indispensable role in standing up for Israel, for the Jewish people, and for the rights of the Jewish people in Israel, in all the territory here. They speak out in parliaments, they attend rallies, they write articles, opinion pieces in the mainstream discussion. So I think they're one of our most crucial allies, and I think it's something we need to only further develop these relationships, certainly from our perspective here in Israel. I think it's a crucial, strategic, long-term relationship.
Arsen, there are literally tens of millions of people watching the show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
Israel is under no shortage of challenges. Certainly one of the most foremost is being in the international legal arena, but this is a challenge that we can defeat. We can use the law to stand up for Israel, to fight anti-Semitism, BDS and terror, but we need to do it together. We need to do it with our allies, with our partners across the world, and we can and we are using the law to effect change.
Thank you, Arsen, for being on the show, and thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.